In 1961, President Kennedy called on all Americans to rise to the challenges of the day. He knew that success depended upon the unity of efforts throughout the federal government and the nation. The Greater Boston Federal Executive Board, one of 28 across the country, fosters communication, coordination, and collaboration with federal, state, and local government agencies. This is your federal government, and I am your host, Diane LeBlanc. Hello, everyone. Today we are featuring the United States Department of the Treasury Internal Revenue Service, and our guest is Peggy Riley, Media Relations and Public Relations Specialist. Peggy, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So we've actually known each other a long time. We've both worked for the federal government a long time. I now am retired.
Lucky you.
But you are still with the IRS. So let's start by telling folks a little bit about your background.
Well, I've been with the IRS for 32 years, believe it or not, and I've always been something in the public relations department, in either media relations or public relations department. So I started off writing the local newsletter that went to internally to employees, and then from there I moved up and I helped implement the electronic filing program many years ago, dealing with tax practitioners throughout the state of Massachusetts, trying to educate them on what electronic filing was and to get them to sign up. And then from there I went to be a media relations specialist. So I had all of the New England states, and at one point I've had all the states down all the way to Maryland, where I would deal with all the media inquiries, do TV interviews such as this, radio shows, and get news releases and information out to people to help educate the public about how difficult the tax laws can be.
Excellent. Well, that's definitely important work. So let's just set the stage by sharing with our viewers just a little bit of the history of the Internal Revenue Service and what the mission is. I mean, why do we have the IRS? Why do we need the IRS?
Well, the mission is to help taxpayers, individual people like you and I, comply with the tax laws. They can be really difficult, and people get overwhelmed and a little bit nervous when they have to deal with any aspect of the government, but especially the IRS. But we're here to help educate the public, to let them know what the tax laws are so that they can comply. Most people are compliant with the tax laws, but sometimes they need a little bit of help out there. So we're here to help them do that, and we're here to enforce those tax laws. So for the people that don't comply, we do have the enforcement side of the IRS, which is going to have to try to enforce those tax laws if they don't automatically comply.
Okay. So I know myself, again, having been a former federal employee, my agency was the National Archives, and the Internal Revenue Service was, in fact, our biggest customer. We stored all of the various, tax records.
Mountains of paper.
And stuff, really, really mountains of paper. And I remember, even going back to my early days as a student trainee, I kept hearing, all of this paper is going to go away, electronic filing is coming, and 5 years later I was hearing the same, and 10 years later hearing the same. And then eventually the electronic filing came. And again, working with the IRS, I saw many, many changes over the years, organizationally, and again, just in terms of how you do your work. But if you could please share with our viewers, what does the IRS in this area, region look like? How are you organized to fulfill the IRS's mission?
Well, when you and I first started years ago, we have a service center that's still in Andover, Massachusetts, that used to store, it's like 2-3 football fields long, and it stored tons and tons and mountains of paper. If you go up there today, you don't see half of that paper anymore. And in fact, a lot of them are in offices now, and they're taking phone calls. So it's kind of evolved over the years. We do have the e-file department where the e-filing returns come in, but we also have a huge call site where we're actually assisting taxpayers. And another part of that call site is making account calls, or taking account calls. If taxpayers have an outstanding bill and they want to set up a payment arrangement, that's where they can call into the IRS and get some help there. So that's that's kind of what goes on in Andover. There's, a few other small functions. There's IT functions and some criminal investigation functions as well. But mostly it's now a call site where we're actually helping people, where it used to be a processing center. We only have a couple of those across the country now because we don't get as much paper. We still do get some paper, but if you notice, if you do file by paper from this area, it doesn't go anywhere near here any longer. And then in Boston, we have offices throughout New England and throughout the state of Massachusetts, local offices where you can actually walk into some of these offices and get some assistance face-to-face with IRS employees. We also have taxpayer advocate service offices, which is kind of a separate operation from the IRS, but it's there to help taxpayers that haven't been able to resolve issues with the regular channels at the IRS. Okay. And then we have some of the compliance functions located in the local offices as well.
So you've mentioned a lot of different kinds of jobs, responsibilities that the IRS still has today. You obviously started, at an entry-level position, as did I. If somebody out there is actually interested in working for the IRS, is your process pretty much the same as other federal entities? Is it the Office of Personnel Management, opm.gov, I think?
Well, we use USA Jobs.
USA Jobs, there you go.
So that's where all of our jobs are posted. And we still are hiring revenue agents and tax auditors. Those are usually the jobs that people are attracted to from accounting degrees in college. But we have various other positions, such as the call center positions, where that's kind of an entry-level job where you would come in and you're trained on specific calls that you'll be taking from the taxpayers. And, there's scripts that they follow. So that's kind of an entry-level job up in the Andover area. But we still do hire, not on a regular basis all the time. It depends on the budget, which we've had some budget issues in the past. But we do hire locally tax auditors and revenue agents, which is probably what most people would be interested in.
Do you still hire seasonal employees to get you through tax time?
We don't hire as many as we used to. But we do hire seasonal employees to help with the phone calls, because obviously from January to April is when taxes are on everybody's minds, and we're going to get more calls then. Where's my refund, obviously, is the biggest one. But just even questions about what do I need to do to file. Okay. So we do hire seasonally some employees for there. And throughout the country where we do have paper processing sites, they still hire seasonally as well.
So clearly the annual filing is how most folks would connect with the IRS. But talk about how do they connect. Are the majority of people still doing electronic filing? Are the majority of people, do they fall into the category that you never hear from them? Are they looking for their refund? What percentage get a refund? What percentage owe money?
Most people file electronically now. It's just so easy to do. The computer programs that are available to you walk you through step by step each line of the tax return. So it makes it so much easier, and it's such a more accurate return than sitting down with the paper and pencil and calculator and trying to figure it all out. It's a very can be a complicated process to follow. So most people are filing electronically. About 75 to 80% of people nationwide actually get a refund.
Wow.
So that we're left with the 20% or so that end up owing some tax. Okay. And we have ways to work with those people. So, we always tell people, don't just put off filing your tax return because you can't pay what's due. We can set up an installment agreement with you so that you can tell us how much you can afford to pay each month. And 9 times out of 10, those are, as long as it's something legitimate, we're going to approve that.
Okay. You've mentioned a few things that I want to go into, in a little bit more detail. But I just want to follow up on the folks who owe money. There are folks who might owe money in any particular year, and you've just said, look, if you can't pay it, reach out to us, we'll figure it out, we'll work something out. But what about folks who maybe haven't paid in a few years? And as you say, they're scared, they're afraid, and you see the TV commercials out there. Do you owe the IRS money? Come to us and we'll work with the IRS on your behalf. Does somebody who's in a situation where it's been a while, do they need somebody working for them, or can they come to the IRS directly?
Well, unfortunately, some of those commercials aren't the most up-to-up people, and they're going to charge people a percentage to actually use their services, which that person may not. I mean, 9 times out of 10, you can just come directly to the IRS, and we'll be able to work with you ourselves. However, if it's a complicated issue, you might owe a lot of money, it's been a few years, maybe you have a small business, then you probably have somebody that's helping you prepare your returns, and you should go to them. They can help represent you with the IRS and get you set on a payment plan. But you shouldn't be afraid, and it's not something that's going to go away. So if you continue to ignore those notices, we are going to place liens or levies, and we may come after you to seize property. It doesn't happen all that often any longer, but it can happen. We do have those resources available to help collect those taxes. So if it gets to that point, it can happen. So we always say, don't be afraid, just give us a call and we'll try to work with you.
I remember, this goes back many years, it was Clinton-Gore administration, and the vice president then was leading what was tagged as the reinventing government effort. And all of the federal executives in our area, we used to wear a badge or a tag that said, "Conversations with America, my government listens." And I will never forget being at Logan Airport, getting my boots shined before I hopped on a plane to somewhere, and the woman asked me about it, and I said, well, I have my own federal agency, but, if you've got questions about anything, I'm happy to hear. And she went on to share with me that her husband, who had passed away and she had now taken over her business, hadn't been the best with the business, and they owed the IRS money, and she was afraid. And I said, you know what, don't be afraid. And we were able to make that connection, and long story short, they want to work with people, and they worked with her, and that was her situation wasn't nearly as bad as she thought, and it was just such a tremendous burden that was lifted from her shoulders.
Well, people are, really nervous in dealing with all aspects of the government, but especially the IRS. But that's why we try to reach out and tell people, don't be afraid to pick up that phone. The worst thing to do is ignore it, because it's not going to go away, and actually it's going to get worse with penalties and interest that continue to build up. So get in touch with us, and we can work with you.
So what's the status of the IRS audit program these days? I know that over the years there have been, various focuses, various audit projects that would occur. Is there a particular focus of the auditing that's done?
Well, we have a couple of different divisions. We have a small business and self-employed division, and then we have a large business and international division. And they deal with their own customers. So large business obviously deals with the bigger corporations, and those audits can take a couple of years to complete. So those are more complex audits where you may actually see a revenue agent that's sitting within that company for a long time to actually go through all the books and records. But the other ones are done by the small business self-employed division, and that's your everyday audits where anybody could virtually be contacted for an audit. A lot of our audits are done by what we call correspondence audits, where you may receive a letter from the IRS asking about a specific item on your tax return, and many times, as long as you can send in some proof to prove why you took that deduction or why you took that credit, then that's resolved as easily as that. And those are most of our audits. But then there are still tax auditors out there that are, calling people in and going through your books and records. And that's why I can't emphasize enough to keep good books and records. Like you said, the person that you met, he may not have been so diligent, but as long as you have something that can back up the information that you claimed on your return, you shouldn't be afraid of getting called for an audit. And many times it's just sending that information in.
So what about audits on somebody filing a personal tax return? Is there a program that just deals with the average citizen who doesn't have a small business or a big business?
Well, yeah, they're still dealt with through that small
Okay,
business
so
division,
that's-
because they have the revenue officers and tax auditors through that small business division. That's just where they're housed within the IRS. But some of them are done by correspondence. Others are called, you're called in and you have to bring in something. Some things that might trigger an audit is a big change in income from one year to the next, or a large amount of deductions based on a small income. So those are some things that might trigger an audit, but if we take a look and we see, well, that person was unemployed this year, then obviously we're not going to audit that return. So there could be good legitimate reasons for those changes, but in the cases where it's not so obvious, you might get called in for an audit.
So I think that there may be the perception out there, certainly, some have stated, if you're audited once, you're going to be audited forever.
Not necessarily. You know, if it's the same situation that's happening years and years, and if we find fraud, yeah, we may go back and take a look at that. But 9 times out of 10, we're not finding fraud. It's just, you know, either a legitimate mistake where the taxpayer didn't understand the tax law, or, you know, they just did try to take some extra credits or deductions that they may not have qualified for. But it doesn't necessarily mean once you're audited that you're audited forever.
So you mentioned the importance of keeping your tax records. And how many years should you keep your personal tax returns? I mean, I think we used to tell people 7 years
Right.
because that was the disposition of a sort of a 1040, but
Right.
what's the current guidance?
It's still about the same guidance. We tell people to keep them about 7 years. Obviously, if you have a business, you might want to keep it a few extra years, maybe 10 years. But like I said, if we find fraud, we can go back as far as we need to. But 7 years is usually a good amount of records to keep. And keep those records safe. You know, that tax return has a lot of your personal information on it. So you want to make sure it's stored in a locked cabinet or a safe, and if you store it on your computer, make sure it's password protected or somehow secure.
So that's really an important distinction, because we've talked about the fact that more people have moved away from filing a paper hard copy tax return to filing on the computer. And you know, when we had the paper, it's very easy. You know, you've got your hopefully a secure, fireproof, locked, you know, box,
Right.
because people have people into their homes all the time, workers, whatever, and you need to protect the information there. But now, when you're doing these things electronically, unless you've set up a secure filing system, that, you know,
Right.
protects
So if
the
somebody
opportunity for some
perhaps
issues.
hacks into your computer,
Yeah.
if they get that information, it really has everything they need to know about you.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they can use that information to do a lot of things. You know, steal your identity, try to open credit accounts with your information. So it's really important that if you do store it on your computer, that you store it, you know, in a password protected type environment, or store it on a storage disk, or, you know, a USB flash drive, and make sure that that's put into a secure location.
I definitely want to talk a little bit more about identity theft and some of the security related concerns in a little bit. But let's talk for just a little bit about the upcoming tax season. And are there any major changes on the horizon, forms, deadlines, deductions? What can you share?
Well, right now there's a few changes. You know, with the new administration coming in, there could be some last-minute changes. But as usual, when we get a last-minute tax bill, we'll work as quickly as we can to try to implement those changes and get that information out to taxpayers. But we did have the PATH Act, which changed a few things. One of them is that your employer now has to make sure that the W-2s are not only issued to individuals, but also to the IRS by January 31st. And we are delaying some refunds for some taxpayers. Any taxpayer that claims earned income tax credit or the advanced child tax credit will be delayed until February 15th. Okay. So even if they file right away in early January, once the system is open, we're going to be holding that return until February 15th so that we can match the information that we receive on the W-2s and other information to try to weed out some of those erroneous refund claims. So that's a big change for people, because sometimes, you know, those people are relying on getting that money really early. We're not sure when the tax season is going to start at this point. Usually mid-January is when we open electronic filing. But you want to make sure that you wait until you get all of your documents to file your tax return. Make sure you have your W-2s, your 1099s, your healthcare forms. It's really important to make sure that you have all that information you need before you file that tax return. And also, the deadline this year will be delayed a couple of days because the 15th falls on a weekend, and here in New England we have Patriots Day on Monday.
The 16th, yeah.
Yep, so Patriots Day will delay it again, so you'll have until Tuesday this year.
There you go. Good to know. A few extra days. Now, what's the best way for somebody to get help with filing their tax return, assuming that they're not in a position, you know, to go to a tax preparer and pay that fee? Are there services that, you know, can they go to the IRS to get help? What should they do?
Well, we used to have a lot of tax preparation sites in our walk-in areas, but now more and more we're turning towards our volunteers. We work with partnerships throughout the country with local organizations that set up what we call the VITA and TCE programs, volunteer income tax assistance and tax counseling for the elderly, where they're set up right out in your local community at the community centers, the senior centers, maybe the libraries, and they're trained by the IRS. They have laptops and computer programs that are given to them through the IRS, working with them. And they'll actually sit there and help you. They'll fill out your tax returns for you. Now, once again, you need to make sure you bring all of your information to them so that they can file a complete and accurate return, but it's all for free.
Is that an active program here in Massachusetts
Yes.
with partners throughout a lot of different communities?
It's very active. It's,
Okay.
throughout the country and throughout the communities here in Massachusetts.
And that's essentially for our senior citizens?
No, it's for low income,
Okay.
non-English speaking, and senior citizens. So
Okay.
the tax counseling for the elderly is the one for the senior citizens.
Yep.
They do that in conjunction with AARP. But the VITA programs are your local community colleges. So we use a lot of accounting students. In the community centers, there's a lot of just local community people that are trained by the IRS, and they volunteer their time.
How would somebody find out where those places were in their community?
You can go right online at irs.gov and do a search for VITA, and there's a link right in there. You can put in your zip code, and it will tell you all of the locations within your community. Okay. We also do a lot of publicity during the filing season. We try to get that information into the local newspapers so that or the local TV stations will also advertise where those sites are. And you can call us toll free at 1-800-829-1040 for those of you that don't have computer access.
There you go. And the website just has such a wealth of information on it. But again, I know even when you look at stuff on the website and you read it and you think you understand it, some folks still are like, they don't want to make a mistake. They want to be sure. So it's nice that they can still call in.
Yes, that's true. And these local organizations are trained specifically in credits and deductions for the low income and for the elderly, so they'll be able to help them get the best refund possible.
Excellent. So what about the IRS Taxpayer Assistance Centers? Talk about those. How do those differ from what we just talked about?
So those are actual IRS centers. They are located in the IRS offices throughout the country, and you can come in and actually talk to an IRS representative. Now, for this year, for the first time, we're going to be looking at doing it by appointment. Before, you would just have to come into the office and wait your turn. And sometimes people would be there literally for hours waiting, or they would get turned away if we couldn't handle any more people for that day. So now you can call into 1-844-545-6840 and get actually schedule an appointment at one of these local offices. And you can get a list of all the offices at our website, irs.gov.
Excellent. So any idea how many taxpayer assistance centers we actually have in Massachusetts?
In Massachusetts, we have, I believe, still about 6 or 7.
Okay.
Yeah, we have them. There's one in Boston, there's one in Stoneham, there's one down the Cape, there's one out in Western Massachusetts. So they're located, a little bit away from each other so that we can service people in different areas.
So you might not find one in your own community, but with 6 across the Commonwealth, if your questions can't be answered on the website, if they can't be answered over the phone, there is a place where you can actually go in person, make an appointment to talk to somebody face to face.
That's right.
Excellent.
But really, people are going to find that if they just can log on to irs.gov, they can probably find the answers right there and not even have to try to get through the phone site or schedule an appointment.
Excellent, excellent. All right. So now I want to focus a little bit on some things that were maybe touched upon briefly. The scams that are out there. I got the phone call telling me that the IRS, I owed money and this was urgent and I needed to call back, and click.
This is crazy.
Yes.
Crazy, crazy. Talk about some of the scams that are out there now.
Unfortunately, we're seeing scams all the time, and as soon as we find somebody and shut them down, something else pops up. But you're right. A lot of people are getting phone call, and they're pretty nasty. They're saying that you owe taxes and you need to pay it right away. And in some cases, they're actually threatening people with arrest or taking away their driver's license, or in some cases even deportation, which the IRS is just not going to do. We're not going to call and threaten you. If you owe taxes, you're going to get a letter in the mail from the IRS first before any other contacts. You may receive a phone call somewhere down the line if you don't reply to the letter, but you're going to get something in the mail, so you'll know that you owe taxes. And in most cases, they're targeting people, college students, elderly, people that they think will fall prey for it. So you should, if you get a call that's threatening, you should know that it's really not the IRS. If you get a call that's asking you to pay by some type of a iTunes card, or a prepaid debit card, then you should know it's not the IRS. If we call you, we're going to ask you to, we're going to tell you that you may owe a balance due and work with you to establish how we're going to pay that off. But we're not going to ask for an iTunes card or any kind of prepaid debit card or any of that information over the phone.
Well, so again, you've just touched upon so much information. These phone calling scams are definitely out there. They're targeting, different groups, as you say. You just mentioned iTunes. That's one of the more recent scams where you're providing your iTunes information. I'm guessing that those are the ones that are targeting students, because if you call some senior citizens, they might not know what that was. But
well, we did see some cases where, at some at retailers where a senior citizen would come in and try to buy all these iTunes cards.
Oh,
and
my goodness.
The associate was well enough to know that, what are you doing?
What's going
why
on
are you
here?
buying $3,000 worth of iTunes cards? So there have been some instances
where
of that.
Where those kinds of calls
where they
have
don't
gone
really
to
understand, so they are doing it.
So does the IRS have a sense of, how much money are these scammers making with these calls? Or
they're making millions of dollars across the country. They're getting thousands of dollars out of people at a time if they fall for the scam. But we've been trying to educate taxpayers for years. These scams have been going on for quite some time. So we've been trying to get that information out there, but there's always that person that, doesn't know, that's maybe a little bit scared that it really is the IRS and that they owe money and they don't want to, lose their license or be deported.
So some things to remember. The IRS will always, first contact you by letter. There'll be some sort of formal communication. The IRS will never threaten you, telling you need to do this now,
Right.
or else. In fact, if through normal processes it's determined that you owe money, you always have a right to appeal, to ask questions.
Exactly.
And nothing is ever, you need to, turn over this amount of money in some form or else.
Right.
Other than, them asking for iTunes cards or debit cards or credit card information, other scams out there now?
Well, there are some email scams as well. So you may receive an email that looks like it's official. They copy the IRS logo. They might use a form that is familiar from the IRS, looks like an IRS notice. We don't send notices by email, and we don't normally correspond by email with taxpayers. So if you're getting an email, don't click on any links, because the links could download some malicious software onto your computer where that person can actually hack into your computer, and if you've used it to make a purchase, they could get your credit card information, or if you have any personal information like your tax return or something like that on there with all of the information that they need, they could actually steal your identity. So you don't click on any links and don't respond to any emails, because we're not going to be corresponding with you by email.
So what about actual written correspondence? You just said these scammers are able to craft emails that, look like they're coming from the Internal Revenue Service. Are they trying to craft correspondence?
Occasionally they have tried the written correspondence. We don't see that as
Scary.
much, but you know, it's easier for them to make a ton of phone calls. And actually, if you get the phone call, they do it in an atmosphere where it sounds like they're in a call site, so you can hear other people making calls in the background to make it even feel more legitimate. But we don't see as many letters going through it. We have seen it in the past, so you have to be really careful. If you get something that you're not sure about, an email, a phone call, a letter, call the IRS at 1-800-829-1040 to find out if you do actually legitimately owe something, and we'll be able to work with you.
Okay. Do you have any reason to believe that those being targeted owe money, or they're just sort of random categories of people?
No, they're random categories of people, and probably in most cases they don't owe money.
Interesting. So you mentioned a phone number that people could call if they get, if they get a phone call or if they have an email. First off, I know that I've talked to some people who get these crazy calls and they want to keep the caller on the phone. They want to ask questions. They want to sort of negotiate it. Ever a good thing to do? You just click.
And it's always good to just hang up. I mean, there's nothing to negotiate. They're trying to convince you that you owe money. They're trying to get you to do something. And, the longer you stay on, maybe they would be more convincing and you'd be more apt to make that payment to them.
I would think it would be very difficult to go after these folks and actually shut them down, but you mentioned that some of them have been shut down. Who does that? Is it the IRS? Is it your...
We work with the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, TIGTA for short, and they'll actually go after these individuals or groups of people usually, and they have been shut down. Recently, within the last couple of weeks, we shut down a big, huge calling site, but they're not just coming from the United States, they're coming from out of the country as well, India, everywhere. They're all over the place. So we have been able to shut some down, and we haven't seen as many scams recently as we shut down a couple weeks ago where we shut down this big group that was actually doing it.
Excellent. So that's the good stuff going on that people don't hear about.
Right.
You are making some headway.
Yes, and we want people to let us know. If you get an email, you can forward it to a special email box. We have all this information up on our website, but you can send it to a special email box where we can take a look at it and try to shut it down. If you get a phone number, a lot of times they actually spoof, what we call spoof the phone number, so it looks like it's coming from a legitimate IRS number.
Yeah.
So we can't always get the phone number, but if, the more that you tell us about it, the more we're able to try to track down where these calls and these emails are coming from and try to shut them down.
Okay, excellent. All right, earlier you mentioned briefly identity theft. What is tax-related identity theft?
Well, tax-related identity theft is where the perpetrators actually get your information and file a fake tax return before you're able to come in and file your return. So a lot of this happens early in the filing season. They try to get in right away. They've stolen your information from other places, not from the IRS, but from somewhere else, and using that information, they create fake W-2s, and then they actually file a return. They may claim a bunch of children so they can get more earned income tax credit. They're getting inflated refunds. But then what happens when you come in to file your return is your return gets rejected because there's already been a return filed if it was processed. So that's what tax-related identity theft is. And then you would have to come in and file an IRS affidavit and go through this whole process to prove that you are the person that you say you are. And it delays the legitimate refund for quite some time. We're working to downsize that amount of time that it takes us to get it to the right taxpayer. But we do have, a number of checks and balances that we have to go through to make sure that that person is who they say they are.
Okay. So a person just sort of unsuspecting, tax season, filling out their form, put in their social security number, try to send this off, and this isn't going anywhere because somebody else has already used that social security.
That's right. And most of the time, that person doesn't know until they go to file that return.
And okay, so that's sort of how, if the person initiated it, they could become aware of it at that point. Does the IRS, are there any protections in place where maybe the IRS would know before the person that they were a victim of identity
We've
theft?
been putting a number of checks in place, and that's part of the W-2s having to come in early as well, so that we get the W-2s later than the individual taxpayers get them in years past. So by the time we went to match the W-2 to the return, the refund would already be sent out. So we're trying to stop some of that. A lot of it, they're claiming that extra earned income tax credit. So that's why we're delaying that a little bit. But we also have had a security summit with a number of different organizations and agencies that we've been working with to try to reduce the number of identity theft fraud that is happening. And we put in a whole bunch of checks and balances every year to try to stop some of that from happening.
And you've had some good results in even this past year. But before we get to that, if somebody finds themselves in that situation, they can't file their tax return, walk through again the steps. What do they do at that point?
So you want to get in touch with the IRS because you obviously could be a victim of ID theft. In most cases, you're going to have to fill out what we call the identity theft affidavit. So there's a whole taxpayer identity theft kit available online that goes through all these steps of what you need to do. And then you also want to talk to the Federal Trade Commission because obviously your information got stolen from somewhere else, not from the IRS. This was just one way they used it. But you want to make sure that you alert them as well so that if they're using it for any other purposes, that you'll be able to stop that. Right. And you also want to alert at least one of the 3 credit bureaus so that they can put a notation on your account, because the other things that they do with your information is open new bank accounts, maybe a mortgage, maybe a loan, and then this is all in your name, so you'll end up being responsible for it. So you want to get those alerts out there as quickly as possible.
So you mentioned that the IRS has on their site a whole section devoted to identity theft, and there's a resource out there for victims of identity theft that will actually walk them through that. Will it provide them with the information that they need on the Federal Trade Commission?
Definitely. It will provide the phone numbers, how to get in touch with them. It'll provide a link to the identity theft affidavit that you need to file with the IRS, and it will go through the steps of what you need to do to alert the credit bureaus, maybe your bank, your banks, to let them know that this has happened to you, so that they'll be able to look out and make sure that they didn't use that information for any other purpose.
So it's got all of that out there. And again, the majority of people are out there on the computer these days, but if they're not, and they believe that they are the victim of identity theft, they can call and talk to somebody?
Right. You can reach out to the IRS at 1-800-829-1040, and we'll be able to point you in the right directions and get you started with what you need to do.
Okay. All right. So you figure out you're the victim of identity theft. You can no longer use your Social Security number because somebody has already filed a return, but you still have the obligation to file a return, correct?
Right.
So what do you do? What's your number?
If we establish that you have been a victim of identity theft and they've used it to file a tax return, in some cases we issue what we call an IP PIN. So it's a personal identification number that's just for you, so that nobody else will know that. And then you use that number to actually get your return through, so that you'll be able to file.
All right. So when I was preparing for our meeting today, I found some information out there on the Taxes Security Together Awareness Program. What's that?
It's a security summit that the IRS has been working on for the last couple of years, where we come together with other state agencies. So we have a lot of the Department of Revenues, like the Mass Department of Revenue, different ones throughout the country, and members of the tax preparation community as well. So we have H&R Block or Intuit, members of all of those organizations and other federal agencies that may be affected, where we're working together with them to get information out to people and to come up with ways that we can help stop some of this ID theft and scams that are going on out there.
So I was reading that even just last year, from the extra measures that were taken, the number of victims of identity theft had gone down. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, just last year with some of the things that we've implemented, some of the verification steps that you now have to go through. So, you used to be able to get a transcript online, but now you have to definitely verify, you have to go through a number of steps to verify that you're who you say you are before you can get any information from the IRS. So we've implemented a number of different steps, and the actual number of cases went down 50% last year. So what we're doing with our partners and what we're doing internally is really working, but unfortunately the scammers are out there and they're always coming up with new and creative ways to try to use the information that they have.
That's interesting, because there would legitimately be many requests to the IRS for copies of a tax return, because sometimes when you go to prepare your tax return, if you haven't kept those records that you're supposed to keep, you think, ooh, I need this, or you need it for a financial aid application for you to get your kid into college. So you then need to go to the IRS to request a duplicate or a transcript. I mean, I remember we used to see those requests funnel through the National Archives. We used to get people calling us all the time saying, you've got my tax return there, I'd like to come get a copy. And you know, we would explain it doesn't work like that. You need to go back through the IRS. And again, back in the day, a much more cumbersome process. The IRS would contact us, request the paper record. We would have somebody pull it, send it back up to the Andover Service Center. They would do something there, and then finally get the taxpayer.
And it would take a number of weeks, sometimes months, to get that copy.
It would, because of the process. But now, I mean, the good news is it's electronic in most cases, so they can get it quicker. I mean,
but getting it quicker always comes with a price to pay.
Exactly.
So you know that we had to implement some security standards, and so you know that get transcript was down for quite a while last year while we were working to implement some standards so that it would make it more difficult for somebody to come in and get it that wasn't the legitimate person. So, you know, that has worked out, and it might take, you know, a few more steps to get that information, but you're right, you can get it available electronically, but it's even a better reason to keep that copy of that tax return now. So, and especially for your 2015, hopefully you kept it, because you're going to need the adjusted gross income if you file electronically this year. That's one of the other standards that has been implemented so that we can verify that it's actually you.
So what else can people do to protect themselves against identity theft? I mean, keep good records, protect your records. But
exactly, protect everything. You don't want to carry your Social Security number around. So don't carry that card, keep it at home. You know, you have your license, you have enough identification on you, and don't give away your Social Security number unless you absolutely need to. That's really what people are using to actually do a lot of this ID theft and scams. So you want to make sure you protect that information and any of your private information. Your PIN numbers, your bank account numbers, you have to be very careful these days.
All things you should obviously protect and never give to anybody over the phone.
Exactly. You just don't know who you're talking to on the other end of the phone.
Interesting. Trying to think. All right, we've covered an awful lot of territory here. I guess, you know, in terms of protection, I know with so many things being on the computer, with the data being electronic, many people think if they hit delete, it's gone. Talk about that.
It's actually not gone. It's, you know, there's some form of it still there available on your computer. So if you're getting rid of some old electronics, it's a really good idea to wipe them clean. You know, just get rid of everything that's on it. Just go back to maybe the factory settings or something. And not only just your computer or your laptop, but also any smaller devices that you might use, your mobile phone. I mean, there's so much information that you do banking on your telephone now, or your iPad, or you just have to be very careful and make sure if you're disposing of something to make sure that you wipe it clean, because even though you hit that delete button, there's something still there.
So at the beginning of the show, we talked very briefly about the IRS's mission. And, you know, to sort of paraphrase, you said, you know, we're there to help people comply with the tax law. There seems to be more of a customer service focus. Did the mission statement change recently?
Well, it adjusted back in RRA 98. You know, we restructured after we went through a number of Senate hearings. There was a big restructuring of the IRS, and the focus did change. There was a focus more on compliance before that, and, you know, really getting out there and trying to make people comply, and using liens and levies and, you know, all those processes to get people to pay. But now it's we've more changed our focus to an education purpose. the tax law is vast. It's huge. It's you know, it's a big stack of laws, and nobody can know everything. And even though there's so much available online, so many resources, it's still a tough thing to comply with. So the more we can get out there and educate people about the earned income tax credit, a credit for low income working families, about filing electronically, it's going to make it easier for them to comply.
Excellent. So again, we have covered an awful lot of territory here, but is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want for our viewers to know about?
I think we've touched on most things that would affect most of your viewers, but just remember that irs.gov has so many resources. We have YouTube videos where you could actually watch those to see how some of the tax laws might apply to you. We have short tax tips where we try to put it in plain English, some of the difficult credits and deductions that you might qualify for. So there's a number of resources right at irs.gov, but for those of you that can't use irs.gov, give us a call. 1-800-829-1040, or try to come into one of our walk-in offices where we'll be more than willing to help you.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you so much. I want to thank Peggy Riley for being with us today to talk about the work of the IRS, and in particular what's being done to protect all of us against tax-related identity theft and the many telephone and email scams that are out there. I thank you for watching, and I hope that you will continue to join us as we feature other federal agencies on your federal government.